At 9:47 a.m. on June 6, 1944, Lieutenant Thomas Fraser pushed the throttle forward on his P-51 Mustang and lifted off from his airfield in England. He was bound for France, part of the massive air cover protecting Allied forces landing on the beaches of Normandy. Fraser was assigned to the 334th Fighter Squadron of the 4th Fighter Group. The Mustang he flew that morning was nicknamed Jerry Olive Drab Camouflage .50 caliber machine guns, a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 1,490 horsepower. It was the best long-range fighter in the American arsenal, and Fraser knew how to handle it. What Fraser did not anticipate was that within hours his aircraft would be on the ground in German-occupied France and, within days, a German test pilot would be flying it over Germany. That test flight would redefine everything the Luftwaffe believed about the plane that had been dominating the skies over Europe. The trouble began at 12,000 feet over northern France. Fraser's squadron was providing cover for a bomber formation when his engine started running erratically, oil pressure falling, coolant temperature climbing. The Merlin engine that made the Mustang so deadly was also its primary vulnerability, liquid-cooled, with radiators under the fuselage and coolant lines throughout the airframe. One small leak, one minor puncture from flak or bullets, and the engine could overheat within minutes. Fraser had no alternative. He radioed his flight leader, broke formation, and headed downward. He needed to locate a place to land before the engine ceased entirely. The countryside below was a patchwork of fields and hedgerows, German territory, enemy soldiers everywhere. But Fraser had no options. The engine was failing. He spotted a field that appeared flat enough. Wheels down, flaps down. He brought the Mustang in as gently as possible, touched down on uneven grass, and rolled to a stop. The aircraft remained intact. No damage to the airframe, no bent propeller, no broken landing gear, just an engine that refused to run. Fraser climbed from the cockpit, surveyed the quiet French countryside, and began walking, trying to evade capture. He didn't get far. German troops located him within hours. The Mustang had sat in that field for less than 6 hours before a German recovery unit arrived. They had an established system for this, a well-organized operation run by specialized salvage teams called Bergbataillon. Their mission was to recover downed Allied aircraft before roaming American and British fighters could turn them into scrap. The team worked quickly. They drained the remaining fuel, disconnected the battery, covered the cockpit, and posted guards. By nightfall, a heavy truck with a flatbed trailer was backing up to the Mustang. By dawn the next day, Fraser's P-51 was on a train heading east to Germany, bound for Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's primary aircraft testing facility. Rechlin was located roughly 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin in a remote section of Mecklenburg. The facility had served as Germany's main aircraft test center since 1936. Every new German design passed through Rechlin. Every captured enemy plane that could be made airworthy ended up there too. The complex had multiple runways, hangars full of experimental planes, workshops staffed with expert mechanics, and a cadre of test pilots who flew everything from gliders to the newest jet fighters. One of these pilots was Hans ver Lurch, 30 years old, trained as an engineer, and one of Germany's finest aviators. Lurch had learned to fly gliders as a teenager, earned his powered aircraft license in the 1930s, and joined the Luftwaffe when the war began. But he never flew combat missions, his skill was too valuable. He was assigned to Rechlin as a test pilot, tasked with flying any aircraft provided and producing detailed performance reports. By June 1944, Lurch had flown over 120 types of planes, German designs, Italian designs, captured Soviet fighters, captured British bombers. He had test-flown Spitfires, Lancasters, P-38s, P-47s. He could take off in an unfamiliar plane without a manual or checklist, relying solely on his engineering knowledge and pilot instincts. Remarkably, he had never crashed a single aircraft in his career, despite flying enemy machines with no instructions, no training, just educated guesses about control locations and system operations. When Fraser's Mustang arrived at Rechlin on June 8, Lurch was ordered to have it ready to fly within 2 days. That was unusually fast. Normally, captured aircraft would sit for weeks while mechanics inspected every system, checked for sabotage, repaired damage, and learned how each component functioned. But the Luftwaffe urgently needed information on the P-51.
The Mustang had appeared over Germany in December 1943.
Before that, American bombers had been escorted by P-38s and P-47s, capable planes but with limited range, leaving bombers vulnerable deep inside Germany.
Luftwaffe fighters had been destroying them by the dozens. Then came the Mustang.
Suddenly, American bombers had escorts capable of reaching any target: Berlin, Munich, even deep into Poland. The Mustang could fly over 900 miles on internal fuel, 1,500 with drop tanks. It could reach 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, climb to 42,000 feet, turn with a Messerschmitt Bf 109, dive away from a Focke-Wulf FW-190, and its .50 caliber machine guns could shred a German fighter. In 6 months, the Mustang had transformed the air war over Europe. German pilots who had dominated in 1943 were suddenly on the defensive. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe were reversing.
Commanders could not fully understand why this single American fighter outperformed all other Allied aircraft. That is why Lurch was given just 2 days to prepare Fraser's Mustang. Mechanics at Rechlin worked around the clock, removed the engine, located the coolant leak that had forced Fraser down, and repaired it.
They inspected every system, every control surface, every fuel line, every hydraulic connection. They painted the underside and tail bright yellow, the standard color for captured aircraft at Rechlin, to prevent German anti-aircraft gunners from firing on it. They added large black crosses on the wings and fuselage, assigned it a German designation code T9 plus HK, and filled the tanks with high-octane American fuel from captured stocks.
By the morning of June 10, the Mustang was ready. Lurch approached the aircraft at 8 o'clock hours.
He had reviewed all available information: the Luftwaffe's intelligence reports, accounts from pilots who had faced the Mustang, technical drawings recovered from downed aircraft, and performance estimates from combat observations. But this was second-hand data. He was about to obtain first-hand knowledge. He would discover if the P-51 Mustang truly matched American claims, or if it was just another overrated fighter that excelled only on paper. The walk-around inspection lasted 20 minutes.
The airframe looked sturdy, with smooth skin, flush rivets, and clean lines.
The wings were thin, far thinner than a Bf 109 or FW-190.
Lurch recognized the laminar flow airfoil design: low drag at high speeds, smart engineering.
The cockpit was roomy compared to German fighters, with decent visibility, though not as good as the later bubble canopy models he had seen in intelligence photos.
Do not underestimate it. Do not assume your Messes or Focke-Wulf was automatically superior. The Mustang could beat you in
a turning fight, could outrun you in level flight, and could dive away from you if things got bad.
The only advantages German fighters had were armament and experienced pilots. German 20mm and 30mm cannons hit harder than American 50 caliber machine guns.
But by mid-1944, experienced German pilots were getting killed faster than they could be replaced. The Americans were not the only ones who noticed something unusual. German fighter pilots started receiving information about the Mustang's capabilities, information that contradicted what they had been told before. At JG-1, a fighter wing defending northern Germany, pilots gathered in a briefing room to watch a demonstration. Outside on the airfield, several captured Allied aircraft had landed: P-38s, P-47s, a Spitfire, and a Mustang with German markings. The unit touring these airfields was called the Wunders Circus Rosarius, the Rosarius Traveling Circus, named after Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius, who commanded the 2nd Staff of the Versuchverband Oberkommando Luftwaffe, the experimental unit of the Luftwaffe High Command. Rosarius's job was to familiarize German pilots with Allied aircraft, so they would understand their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. The briefing officer stood in front of the room and spoke carefully.
You have been told that the Bf 109 and the FW-190 are superior to American fighters in some respects.
This is true, but the P-51 Mustang is different.
You will see it demonstrated today. Pay attention to its roll rate, its acceleration, its turning performance. It is faster than you expect.
It can turn tighter than you have been taught, and it has the range to follow you home if you try to.
Disengage.
Some of the pilots shifted uncomfortably. They had been in combat
against Mustangs.
They knew what the briefing officer was saying was true, but officially admitting it was
different. After the briefing, the pilots walked out to the flight line. The Mustang with T9 markings was parked next to a Bf-109
and a Fire 190. German pilots climbed into the cockpits, examined the controls, looked at the gun sight, felt the stick response. Then the demonstration flight began.
2 German pilots took off in the Bf-109 and the FW-190.
A third pilot, an experienced test pilot
from Rosarius's unit, took off in the Mustang.
The 3 aircraft climbed to 10,000 feet, circled the airfield, and
began a simulated dogfight.
The pilots on the ground watched carefully. They saw the Mustang stay with the Bf-109 through hard turns.
They saw it roll faster than the FW-190.
They saw it accelerate away from both German fighters in a level flight. They saw it climb at the same rate, dive faster, and maneuver with confidence. When the 3 aircraft landed, the German pilots who had been watching were quiet.
That demonstration summarized the problem the Luftwaffe faced.
For years, German pilots had been told their aircraft were the best in the world.
In 1940, 1941, 1942, that was mostly true.
But by 1944, the Americans had caught up and in some cases they had pulled ahead.
The Mustang was the proof.
German pilots who had spent 3 years controlling the air war suddenly found themselves
reacting to American initiative. American pilots called it energy fighting.
The Mustang had so much power and such good acceleration that it could dictate the terms of combat.
If a Mustang pilot wanted to fight, he could close in and force an engagement.
If he wanted to disengage, he could dive away or outrun you in level flight.
That psychological shift was as important as the technical performance. By August of
1944, Lurch's report on Fraser's Mustang had been distributed throughout the
Luftwaffe.
Fighter units received copies. Training squadrons received copies.
Engineering teams received copies.
The report was detailed, technical, and honest.
It did not sugarcoat the Mustang's performance. It did not claim German superiority out of propaganda necessity. It simply stated the facts. The P-51 Mustang was an excellent fighter aircraft. It had exceptional range.
It had high speed at all altitudes.
It had good maneuverability. It had effective armament.
And most importantly, it was being produced in massive numbers.
The Americans could afford to lose Mustangs and replace them within weeks. Germany could not afford to lose experienced pilots. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was running out of experienced pilots faster than the training schools could produce new ones. Young pilots with 50 hours of flight time were being thrown into
combat against American pilots with 200 hours of training and 50 combat missions. The result was predictable.
German pilots died.
American pilots racked up kills. One of the most dramatic examples of this came in March
of 1945. By then, the war was almost over. Germany was being overrun from the east by Soviet forces and from the west by American and British forces. The
Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former strength.
Most of its experienced pilots
were dead or captured. Most of its aircraft had been destroyed on the ground by strafing attacks.
Fuel was so scarce that many remaining aircraft could not fly. In early March of 1945, American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German pilots. They wanted to know what the Germans Thought of American aircraft. 22 captured Luftwaffe pilots, many of them experienced aces, were interviewed. The interrogations were compiled into a classified document called the Air Intelligence Weekly Summary, dated March 23, 1945.
The section titled Allied Fighters as Germans See Them contained detailed opinions from men who had fought against P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. The results were unambiguous. The captured German pilots rated the P-51 Mustang as the best fighter in the American arsenal. They respected its speed, range, and agility. Some admitted they would only try to outrun it if they had a serious head start. Others said that only the most skilled German pilots dared to engage a Mustang in a turning fight because the Mustang's agility was difficult to counter. One experienced pilot was quoted as saying that the American .50 caliber machine guns were highly effective against fighters, especially because they offered a high volume of fire with deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe had spent 2 years developing tactics to defeat American bombers and fighters. Those tactics had worked against the P-38 and the P-47, but they did not work as well against the Mustang. The Mustang was too fast, too maneuverable, and had too much endurance. By the time these interrogations were conducted, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe had been defeated. Allied air forces controlled the skies over Germany completely. German pilots who managed to take off faced overwhelming odds 5-1, 10-1. Sometimes 20-1, and many of those Allied fighters were Mustangs. Hans Ver survived the war. After Germany surrendered in May of 1945, he was captured by American forces. They recognized his value as a test pilot and his knowledge of German aircraft development. He was interrogated extensively about the aircraft he had flown and the reports he had written. The Americans wanted to know what Lurch thought of their aircraft, especially the P-51. Lurcher told them the truth. The Mustang was one of the best aircraft he's had ever flown. It had a combination of speed, range, and maneuverability that few fighters could match. It was well engineered, well built, and deadly in combat. The Americans took notes. After the war, Lurcher returned to civilian life in Germany. He worked as an engineer and occasionally as a test pilot for German aviation companies. In 1980, he published a book titled Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book was based on his wartime logbooks and contained detailed descriptions of every aircraft he had flown. The chapter on the P-51 Mustang was one of the longest. Lurcher described Fraser's aircraft in detail, talked about the test flights at Rechlin, and gave his honest assessment of its performance. He never saw the P-51 as an enemy aircraft. To Luz, it was simply a well-designed machine. As an engineer and a pilot, he appreciated good design regardless of which country produced it. Lurch died in 1994 at age approximately 80. His book remains one of the most detailed accounts of Luftwaffe aircraft testing during World War II. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, the pilot who force-landed that Mustang in northern France, spent the rest of the war as a prisoner in Germany. He was captured on June 6, 1944, the same day the Allies landed in Normandy. He was liberated in May of 1945 by advancing American forces and returned to the United States that summer. He never knew what happened to his aircraft until years later when researchers tracked down the story through German records. Fraser learned that his P-51, the one nicknamed Jerry, had been tested by one of Germany's best pilots, had been flown by the Rosaria Circus to multiple Luftwaffe bases and had been used to train German pilots on how to fight against Mustangs. The aircraft designated T9 plus HK was lost on December 10, 1944. Fraser's service record listed 1
Aircraft lost to mechanical failure over enemy territory on June 6, 1944.
It did not mention that his aircraft became one of the most important intelligence sources the Luftwaffe had. On the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang changed the air war over Europe in ways that went beyond simple performance numbers. It was not just fast or maneuverable or long-ranged. It was all of those things combined in one aircraft. It was produced in massive numbers. Over 15,000 Mustangs were built during the war. It was reliable enough to fly deep into enemy territory and return home. It was versatile enough to escort bombers, strafe ground targets, and dogfight with enemy fighters. And it was available at exactly the moment the Allies needed it most. The Mustang's origins made its success even more remarkable. North American Aviation designed and built the prototype in just 102 days in 1940. The British had approached the company asking for them to build P-40 Warhawks under license. Instead, the president of North American Aviation, James Kindleberger, proposed building an entirely new fighter from scratch under the direction of chief designer Edgar Schmud. The British agreed. The first prototype, called the NA-73X, flew on October 26, 1940, just 149 days after the contract was signed. That development timeline was unprecedented. Most fighter aircraft took years to design, test, and bring into production. North American did it in less than 5 months. But the early Mustangs had a problem. They were powered by Allison engines that performed well at low altitude but lost power above 15,000 feet. The aircraft was fast at sea level, over 400 miles per hour in some tests. But at 20,000 feet, where most combat over Europe took place, the Allison-powered Mustang could barely reach 350 miles per hour. That made it useless as a bomber escort. The Royal Air Force used early Mustangs for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. American forces sent Allison-powered Mustangs to North Africa and the China-Burma-India theater, where combat happened closer to the ground. Then in late 1942, someone had an idea that changed everything. Ronald Harker, a test pilot at Rolls-Royce, suggested fitting a Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine. The Merlin had a 2-stage supercharger that maintained power at high altitude. Rolls-Royce installed Merlin engines in 5 test Mustangs. The results were astonishing. The Merlin Mustang could reach speeds over 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. It could climb to 40,000 feet. It had all the range and low drag characteristics of the original design, but now it had high altitude performance that matched or exceeded any fighter in the world. An American military attaché in London, a man named Thomas Hitchcock, saw the test, the results, and immediately sent a report to Washington. Hitchcock had been a fighter pilot in World War I, had been shot down and captured by the Germans, had escaped from a prisoner of war camp, and after the war had become one of America's most famous polo players. He understood both aviation and how to get things done through military bureaucracy. His report on the Merlin Mustang emphasized that this was the long-range escort fighter America needed for the bombing campaign against Germany. The Army Air Forces authorized North American to begin production of Merlin-powered Mustangs immediately. Packard Motor Company in Detroit was already producing Merlin engines under license from Rolls-Royce. North American installed Packard Merlin in Mustang airframes and created the P-51B model. Production began in mid-1943. By December of that year, the first Merlin Mustangs reached England. The 354th Fighter Group, flying P-51Bs, began escort missions over Germany in December 1943. Within weeks, it was clear the Mustang had changed everything. American bombers that had been suffering losses of 8 to 10% per mission suddenly had losses dropped to 3 to 4%. German fighters that had been attacking bomber formations with impunity suddenly faced long-range
escorts that could follow them home,
and Luftwaffe pilots who had controlled German airspace for 4 years suddenly
found themselves on the defensive. The P-51D model, which entered service in mid-1944, was even better.
It had a bubble canopy that gave the pilot 360 degrees visibility. It had 650 caliber machine guns instead of 4.
It had improved ammunition feed systems that reduced jamming.
It had provisions for mounting rockets or bombs under the wings for ground attack missions, and it had additional internal fuel capacity that extended its already impressive range.
A P-51D with drop tanks could fly 1700 m, stay
in combat for 30 minutes, and return to base with fuel to spare.
No other single-engine fighter in World War II could match that endurance.
The strategic impact was enormous.
Before the Mustang, American daylight bombing raids were limited to targets within range of shorter-legged escort fighters. That meant targets in France, Belgium, and Western Germany.
Berlin, the industrial centers in central Germany, and oil refineries in Poland were beyond reach. German factories could be relocated east, beyond the range of American escorts, and continue producing aircraft
and weapons. But when the Mustang arrived, nowhere in Germany was safe.
Bombers could hit targets anywhere, and Mustangs would protect them.
German industrial capacity, which had been dispersed to avoid bombing, was suddenly vulnerable again. Oil refineries,
aircraft factories, ball bearing plants, chemical works, transportation hubs, all were within range of American bombers protected by Mustang escorts.
In late
1943 and early 1944, the Allied bombing campaign against Germany was suffering
terrible losses. Bombers were being shot down by the hundreds.
Crews were dying. The campaign was on the verge of being suspended. Then the Mustang arrived in large numbers.
Suddenly, bombers had protection all the way to Berlin and back. Suddenly, German fighters could not attack bomber formations without facing swarms of long-range American escorts.
Suddenly, Luftwaffe pilots who took off to intercept bombers found themselves being hunted by Mustangs waiting above the formations.
The air war shifted. In February 1944, General Jimmy Doolittle made a decision that changed American fighter tactics. Doolittle had just taken command of the 8th Air Force in England.
Before his arrival, American fighters were required to stay close to the bomber formations
at all times.
If enemy fighters attacked, American fighters would drive
them away and then return to close escort.
This defensive tactic protected bombers but allowed German fighters to escape and attack again later.
Doolittle changed the rules.
He told his fighter pilots to go after German fighters aggressively.
If enemy aircraft were
spotted, American fighters should pursue them wherever they went, shoot them down, destroy them on the ground if
possible. The goal was not just to protect bombers. The goal was to destroy the Luftwaffe completely. This change in tactics combined with the Mustang's long
range and high performance was devastating to German fighter forces.
American pilots could now hunt German fighters across all of Germany.
If a Luftwaffe pilot took off to intercept bombers, Mustangs would chase him.
If he
tried to land, Mustangs would follow him to his airfield and shoot him down during landing approach.
If he managed to land safely, Mustangs would strafe his aircraft on the ground.
German pilots called this tactic freie Jagd,
free hunting. American pilots called it fighter sweeps. Whatever the name, it was deadly effective. One example of this came in January 1944.
Major James Howard flying a P-51B with the 356th Fighter Squadron of the 354th
Fighter Group was escorting B-17 bombers to a target near Oschersleben in Germany. Howard's squadron got separated from the bombers during the mission. Howard found himself alone with 60 B-7s. Under attack by 30 German fighters. Instead of retreating, Howard attacked. For 30 minutes, he fought alone against multiple German fighters. He shot down several aircraft, damaged others, and drove the rest away from the bombers. His guns jammed, but he continued making fake attacks to keep German fighters away from the formation. Not a single bomber from that group was lost. Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that decoration. His action on January 11, 1944 showed what a single Mustang pilot could accomplish with skill and determination. But Howard's success was not just individual heroism. It was possible because he flew an aircraft that could stay with the bombers for hours, could fight at high altitude, could outmaneuver German fighters, and had enough ammunition to engage multiple targets. No other fighter in early 1944 could have done what Howard did that day. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was losing the battle. During Big Week, a concentrated bombing campaign in February 1944, Mustang pilots destroyed a significant percentage of Germany's experienced fighter pilots in air-to-air combat. Those were not just aircraft lost. Those were trained, experienced pilots killed or captured. Pilots who could never be replaced. Germany was producing plenty of fighter aircraft. Messerschmitt 109s and Fowler-Wolf 190s were rolling off production of lines by the hundreds, but Germany could not produce trained pilots fast enough to fill the cockpits. By late 1944, many German pilots had less than 100 hours of total flight time when they entered combat. Some had as little as 50 hours. American pilots, by comparison, typically had over 200 hours of training before reaching Europe. And many veteran pilots had flown 50 or more combat missions. The experience gap was enormous. An inexperienced German pilot in a good aircraft could not beat an experienced American pilot in an excellent aircraft. The result was predictable. German pilots died in huge numbers. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe early in the war reversed completely. By 1945, American pilots were achieving kills at ratios of 5 to 1, 10 to 1, sometimes higher. And the P-51 Mustang was responsible for more of those kills than any other Allied fighter. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was defeated and the P-51 Mustang played a larger role in that defeat than any other Allied fighter. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, was interviewed after Germany's surrender. American intelligence officers asked him when he knew Germany had lost the war. In a widely attributed quote, Göring's answer was direct. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." That statement summarized the strategic impact of the P-51. When long-range American fighters could penetrate to the heart of Germany, when they could escort bombers anywhere and hunt German fighters everywhere, the Luftwaffe could no longer defend German airspace. And without control of the air, Germany could not win the war. What the Germans discovered when they tested Fraser's Mustang was not a secret weakness they could exploit. It was the confirmation of what they already suspected. The P-51 was everything American pilots claimed. It was fast. It was agile. It had extraordinary range. It could be flown aggressively without endangering the pilot. It was heavily armed. And the Americans had thousands of them. German engineers could examine the laminar flow wing, the efficient cooling system, and the Packard Merlin engine. They could measure its performance, calculate drag coefficients, and study the control mechanisms. But they could not manufacture enough aircraft to match American output. They could not train sufficient pilots to replace combat losses. They could not produce enough fuel to keep their remaining fighters operational. By the time Lurch flew Fraser's Mustang, Germany had already lost control of the air.
The test flight at Rechlin merely confirmed what German command already realized: the Americans possessed a fighter that could go anywhere, perform any mission, and dominate the skies.
There was nothing the Luftwaffe could do to stop it.
This is how technological superiority truly functions in war, not through propaganda or inflated performance statistics, but through engineering mastery that delivers tangible results. The P-51 Mustang was not flawless. It had vulnerabilities.
The liquid-cooled engine was susceptible to combat damage. The fuel system could become unstable when the fuselage tank was full.
The controls required careful handling at high speeds. Yet its combination of speed, range, agility, and reliability made it the most effective long-range fighter of World War II. Even German test pilots who flew it reached that conclusion. Even German intelligence officers who evaluated it acknowledged its superiority.
When the war concluded, the Mustang's record spoke for itself.
P-51 pilots destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat.
They escorted bombers deep into Germany and brought them home safely. They controlled the skies over Europe in the war's final year, not solely because American pilots were better trained, though many were, and not simply because American tactics were superior, though often they were, but because they flew a plane that provided them every conceivable advantage.
The Germans learned that lesson the hard way, by testing captured P-51s, flying them in simulated combat, and analyzing their capabilities in detail. What they discovered was that sometimes the enemy builds something you cannot surpass, something that commands respect, something that alters the course of the war.
The P-51 Mustang was that aircraft, and even its adversaries recognized it.